Welcome to Nomadic Soldier IRV, where I will interview real veterans and get their stories. Please like, share, and subscribe. Help me share their stories. Now to the story. All right, I'd like to start off by thanking you for interviewing with Nomadic Soldier. Can we start off by what's your name, rank, and service?
Sure, yeah. My name's Brian Jones. So my rank's Lieutenant Colonel, and I serve in the U.S. Army.
All right, do you have any stories you want to share about your military service?
There's a couple that come to mind. The first one that really strikes a chord with me is kind of how and why I joined the Army, right? So I was in college during 9/11, right? So September 11, 2001. I think I was a junior in college at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and the military was not really wasn't really on my mind. I didn't have any plans to serve, but going to class that day, I think I was headed to economics class. Saw televisions in the student union, saw the plane had already hit the World Trade Center, and I think at the time we were in the kind of watching and absorbing everything that was going on. Saw the second plane hit, and knew that the world wasn't kind of the way I had understood it, that it was a more complex, a bigger world, and that there were people out there who did not see the world the way that I had seen the world and did not have our interests at heart, and that really wanted to hurt and harm Americans and the American way of life. And it was at that point I realized that even though I had kind of sort of lived my life in a very small kind of globe about me as a young person is inclined to do, that I wanted to do something and be something that was better for my community, for my country, and for the people that were going to go out and protect our interests, right? So that was the day that I realized I wanted to serve our country and serve the soldiers who serve our country. And then another story that kind of resonates with me, right? So fast forward a couple of years, second lieutenant, going through the officer basic course, right? So it's a transportation school, learning how to be a platoon leader. We all knew that we were going to be going and deploying to either OIF or Operation Iraqi Freedom, or recently there was the Operation Enduring Freedom. So we all knew that we were going to be deploying. And I think one of our cadre came in and said, "Hey, listen, you guys just need to go ahead and understand what your career is going to be like. You're going to deploy at least every year, and you can expect to do a 12-month combat rotation. And then if you're lucky, you'll get 9 months home, right? So just go ahead and get your minds right. If it's not what you signed up for, you need to tough it out, buck up and be ready to be those platoon leaders, XOs, and future company commanders, right?" So we were kind of wrapping our heads around that, learning how to be platoon leaders, and we were going through. And then I with that kind of frame of reference, with that understanding that we were going to be spending a lot of time at war, we were going to be doing a lot of combat missions. Some people really didn't recognize what we'd signed up for, and it was going to be hard. Then we tried our best to train for what that looked like, right? And even though the war had been going on for a few years at that point, probably 4 or 5 years of combat experience, right, we were still figuring out how to train for that, right? So we had convoys, right, tactical convoys. They used to call them clips, right, combat logistics patrols, and we would run training missions at Fort A.P. Hill, which I think they've changed the name since all the posts renamed from years later, and they didn't really know how to simulate those combat environments. So we just get old 5-ton trucks, and we just put Joe on either side, right, shooting machine guns, shooting M16s out the side, trying to best simulate what it was like in Iraq or Afghanistan. And we're all like, okay, this is what it's going to be like. And then a year later, most of us were actually deployed, and I just remember thinking, it was nothing like it, right? Like we'd all trained on being in the cargo area of a truck and pointing our rifles out, looking for targets, figuring out how to lead, how to adjust our aiming point to be able to hit targets while moving. And that's what we thought as second lieutenants we were going to be doing in Iraq or Afghanistan. And when we actually got there, that was not nothing like it. It was virtually nothing like it, right? So maybe it was 10% overlap. We knew that people were going to be trying to blow us up. We knew that people were going to be shooting at us, but we didn't necessarily know what the standard operating procedure is going to be. We didn't know what our troops really expected of us, right? Because many of them had 2 or 3 combat deployments. I think one of my senior squad leaders had at least 3, maybe 4 or 5, actually, now that I think about it. And so we're all thinking, all right, we're going to be shooting out of the back of trucks. We're trying to be, lethal. Like that's what we're doing as platoon leaders. When that was almost entirely opposite, right? So we knew people were going to be shooting at us. That was true. That they were going to be trying to blow us up. That was true. That both those things happened. But it wasn't like we were going to stop and return fire. That wasn't our primary mission. We weren't infantry. We weren't combat arms. So our job was to make sure that the mission got done, right? That we all safely got through it. If we had trucks disabled, if we had people disabled that were injured or killed, to respond to that, recover them, and move out of the contact area and complete the mission. So a lot of us as platoon leaders would go out and we're thinking, all right, we're going to be, killing bad guys. We're going to be, demonstrating our heroism on the battlefield. And we've been trained for something by people in the United States who are doing their best, but just didn't overlap, didn't check at all. So that was kind of my first experiences. We're not in the back of the truck, right? I mean, it sounds obvious, right? But when we were in the basic course, people didn't know how to train that. How do you put 64 lieutenants in a class normally for 30? How do you put 64 lieutenants into a training role where they get valuable experience? The answer is, I don't know, or you don't. And so that experience was limited at best. And the other piece being, the SOP was changing all the time, right? It's like, so for anybody who has deployed, right, we adapt to adversary SOPs, right? Either a complex ambush or putting an obstacle in the road. We adapt to our adversaries, our enemies' SOPs. They adapt right back. So what's true in OIF, 4 or 2 is not true in the subsequent, campaigns, right? So what might be really great SOPs and TTPs for a lieutenant in 2004 is completely useless information and training, or virtually useless in 2005 and 2006. So as fast as we could adapt, our adversaries are adapting. And so you had to go over there saying, all right, you learned maybe a few things useful in your basic course, maybe a few things useful in your ROTC program, but you need to be ready to learn for your first month or 2. Trust a whole lot of people you don't know who might have been here 9 months ahead of you. And then that could be only true for 3 months or 6 months because they're going to change again. So those are kind of the 2 resounding things. Is like, you need to be flexible. You need to pay attention. You need to listen to people who've been there longer than you. And whatever you think you're going to be like when people start shooting at you, and either indirect fire, direct fire it comes into play, probably whatever you thought you were going to be, maybe the exact opposite, right? Or something a little bit less than what you thought you were going to be. So I'll say that during those combat experiences, right? I remember flying into Iraq, and in the middle of the night, me and my battle buddy were kind of late deployers, right? And waking up to small arms fire, machine gun fire, thinking, all right, what did we get ourselves into? Soon we got kind of complacent, right? If you're on the FOBs, the forward operating bases, you can, especially if you don't leave them regularly, like, about half the troops would have support roles, don't leave regularly. You can easily get into a rhythm where you're going to the gym, you're doing your office job, right? You're going to the DFAC, where it starts to just become your new normal until and unless, the adversary plays a role, right? So, rocket attacks, indirect fires from mortar attacks, that was kind of common in Iraq at the time. A lot of people, that was their only combat experience, right? So I had these folks and a lot of great staff sergeants, a lot of great NCOs, a super sergeant first class was my platoon leader, absolutely stellar. She had 13 years, had been a drill sergeant. These were my heroes, right? They've been everywhere. They've done the schools. They've been, NCOs at all the different ranks, right? They've excelled at the different boards. They've made NCOs out of junior soldiers and senior NCOs out of junior NCOs. These guys have done it all. They've been there. They've done that. They know what they're talking about. So some of those folks, the first time they had seen combat conditions was right there next to me. So I'm a second lieutenant, and I revere these people. I've learned so much from them in a short period of time, and I still would say I learned more from them in a year or 2 than maybe the 18 years that follow. But until and unless you're under those combat conditions where there's rockets coming in, right, small arms fire, mortars, you don't know how you're going to perform. So I'm looking to my left and on my right, and I have 13-year Army veterans. They're amazing, right? They're top 10% veterans, right? And this is the first time, they've been in some of these conditions, right? So mortars coming in and the buildings catching on fire, people screaming, there's chaos. The things we train on, right? Your battle drills, right? Get accountability of your troops, right? Go to your hardened locations, whether it's little bunkers or maybe you need to go to an operations center to do whatever primary role you have. They did all those things, right? Amazing NCOs. But once the battle drills were over, they had gotten accountability of their troops. They had gotten they've gotten awareness, right? They've reported up through their comm systems. The battle drill was over, right? So now they're confronted by the chaos that exists, right? So, you're hearing explosions outside. You don't know how close it is. You might have some people you've grown close to in that deployment that you're concerned about, you're worried about. You don't know what you need to do. And so now I'm seeing these amazing NCOs I still would go to war with any time. And they're kind of melting in place, right? They're crying. They're upset. They're shaking. They don't know what to do. And so that's when I realized, training, you can never train enough. It's essential. It degrades really easily, but it saved these NCOs and made them effective, right? And I'm sure they're better for it, but that you really just don't know how you're going to perform. Some people become completely useless, right? As soon as they get scared, they can't do it. Other people rely on those battle drills to 110%. It literally saves lives and it makes us more cohesive as a team. And as a platoon leader, we're so focused on trying to do whatever it is we think we're going to do amazingly well, right? Heroism under fire, go march to the sound of the guns, whatever. But really, it's enabling our NCOs to be more successful. It's giving them those, taking the implied tasks and making them explicit tasks, giving those guidance. Once the battle drill stops, and I recognize this much too late, right? Years later, is I needed to have the next task ready to go. And I needed to be caring and concerned for those NCOs, right? Because they had done everything right. And now they've reached the end of their critical task. And it's all right, what's next, right? And they didn't have an answer. That should have been on me, right? So, and there's like a small percentage of people that I would say really get a kick out of it, right? There's the adrenaline rush, and you see some of those folks that have done their second, third deployment, and they start volunteering for their fourth and fifth. They've done a combat tour here. Maybe they try to go special operations. I know one of my NCOs did that. Just couldn't get enough. They become addicted to the thrill, and there's a place for that, and that's useful. But I just remember seeing how people changed, how quickly once chaos happened, right? And there's a few folks that just have the natural instinct to know what to do next. For all the rest of us, we just have to train harder, more frequently, and then take the last combat engagement and learn from it and apply it to the next one. And I guess I would kind of looking back on that thinking these nice to have things like the VFW or the American Foreign Legion or these war stories we tell when we're having a beer or we're sitting between training engagements, those aren't just nice things to do. They literally are sharing experience from a different part of a combat zone or a different theater or a different time, where we can apply the lessons learned, the experience of the warriors who came before us or the warriors who served in different roles, and we can kind of synthesize. We take that knowledge in and make it our own. So I recognize that war stories are absolutely value added, right? And you hear NCOs and officers telling their war stories. We need to encourage that. We probably need to capture some of that and share that with one another so that, right now we're at a time of peace, right? But within 10 years or 20 years, that peace is never certain. It's never assured. It's never persistent forever. We need to be able to share that with the next generation of leaders, so that they can apply those same lessons when they're platoon leaders or platoon sergeants or company commanders and so on and so forth. So I would say there's no substitute for experience. In the absence of experience, if we can just make training more realistic and tougher, and we can just tell our war stories to people who want to listen. And there's a lot of young soldiers or young recruits, or even looking at other services, Marine, Airmen, sailors. Our war stories add value. They bond us as brothers and sisters, and we need to create the conditions to tell our stories to the folks who will listen.
All right. Very good story. Well, from Nomadic Soldier and a Grateful Nation, I'd like to thank you for your service and thank you for sharing your story.
Well, thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.